In this gripping story, we dive into the life of Brian, a man who once believed his marriage to Megan was unbreakable. For 18 years, they shared a life full of joy, challenges, and two wonderful children. But one sunny morning, a phone call sets off a chain of events that shatters Brian's world, revealing secrets he never anticipated. Join us as we follow Brian's emotional journey of betrayal, resilience, and the quest to rebuild his life and find happiness again. Brian always believed that his marriage with Megan was perfect. They had been together for 18 years, sharing a life full of joy, challenges, and two wonderful children. Chris, the eldest, was a senior in high school, and Hannah, the youngest, was in junior high. Their home in Boston, Massachusetts, was filled with laughter and memories, and for Brian, it seemed like nothing could ever disrupt their harmonious family life. It was a sunny morning in May 2010 when Brian received a phone call that would change everything. Walter, his old friend and colleague, was retiring and invited Brian to his retirement party. The call brought back a flood of memories for Brian, who had shared many adventures with Walter. Despite the nostalgia, Brian felt a twinge of unease. Megan had been distant lately, more preoccupied than usual, but he brushed it off, attributing it to her demanding job. The retirement party was scheduled for the 15th of May, a Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Brian decided not to mention it to Megan, thinking it would be a pleasant surprise. Little did he know, it would be the beginning of a journey he never anticipated. Brian stood in his kitchen, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. Megan was already dressed for work, her usual impeccable attire showcasing her dedication and professionalism. She had always been the epitome of grace and efficiency, and today was no different. "Megan, you look stunning as always," Brian said, trying to catch her eye as she hurriedly packed her laptop into her bag. "Thanks, Brian. I have a busy day ahead," she replied, her tone clipped, not looking up. "Anything special?" Brian inquired, hoping to spark a more engaging conversation. "Just the usual meetings and reports," Megan answered, her voice trailing off as she busied herself with last-minute preparations. Chris and Hannah entered the kitchen, their lively chatter breaking the awkward silence. Brian smiled, grateful for the distraction. "Morning, Dad. Can you give me a ride to school today?" Chris asked, grabbing a piece of toast. "Sure thing, buddy. How about you, Hannah? Need a ride?" Brian turned to his daughter, who was scrolling through her phone. "I'm good, Dad. Grace is picking me up," she replied, her attention still fixed on the screen. Brian nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. Megan glanced at the clock and sighed. "I have to go. I'll be home late." "Don't wait up," she said, giving Brian a quick peck on the cheek before rushing out the door. Brian watched her leave, a sense of foreboding settling in his chest. Shaking off the feeling, he turned to his kids. "All right, let's get going. We don't want to be late," he said, trying to keep his tone cheerful. The drive to Walter's party was filled with anticipation. Brian hadn't seen his old friend in a while, and he was looking forward to catching up. The venue was a cozy restaurant in downtown Boston, a place where they had shared many memories. As Brian walked in, he was greeted by familiar faces. Walter was at the center of attention, his jovial laugh echoing through the room. Brian approached him, a wide grin on his face. "Walter, you old dog. Congratulations," Brian exclaimed, pulling his friend into a bear hug. "Brian, it's been too long. How have you been?" Walter responded, his eyes twinkling with genuine happiness. "Life's been good. Busy, but good. How about you? Ready for retirement?" Brian asked, leading Walter to a quieter corner. "More than ready. It's time to enjoy life without the daily grind," Walter said, raising his glass. As the party continued, Brian mingled with other guests, catching up on old times. However, a nagging thought kept intruding. Megan had been unusually secretive lately, and her demeanor this morning had been off. Brian decided to give her a call, just to check in. Stepping outside, he dialed her number. It rang several times before going to voicemail. Brian frowned, leaving a message. "Hey, Megan, just wanted to see how your day is going. Give me a call when you get a chance." Returning to the party, Brian tried to shake off his unease. Walter noticed his friend's distraction. "Everything okay, Brian?" Walter asked, concern evident in his voice. "Yeah, just thinking about Megan. She's been acting a bit strange lately," Brian admitted. "Marriage can be tough. Sometimes we just need to talk things out," Walter advised, patting Brian on the back. Brian nodded, grateful for the advice. The party wound down, and Brian decided to head home, hoping to catch Megan before she got too busy. That evening, Megan didn't come home until late. Brian was already in bed, pretending to be asleep when she quietly slipped into the room. He listened as she moved around, the sound of her clothing rustling as she undressed. The next few days were a blur of routine, but the tension between Brian and Megan grew palpable. Brian couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He confided in his daughter, Hannah, who had always been perceptive. "Dad, is everything okay with you and Mom?" Hannah asked one evening as they sat in the living room. Brian sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Hannah. I feel like she's hiding something from me. Maybe you should talk to her." "Communication is key," Hannah suggested, her eyes filled with concern. "I will. Thanks, sweetheart," Brian said, hugging her tightly. The following Saturday, Brian decided to follow Megan. She had mentioned a work meeting, but his instincts told him otherwise. He watched as she left the house, waiting a few minutes before getting into his car and trailing behind her. Megan drove to a quaint cafe in a quiet part of town. Brian parked a safe distance away and observed her. To his shock, a young man approached Megan, greeting her with a kiss. Brian's heart sank as he recognized Daniel, a colleague from her office. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. Megan was having an affair. Brian sat in his car, grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, betrayal, and sorrow fought for dominance. After a few moments, he composed himself and drove home, determined to confront Megan later. That evening, Megan returned home, her demeanor calm and collected. Brian waited until the kids were asleep before approaching her in the kitchen. "Megan, we need to talk," Brian said, his voice strained. Megan looked up, her expression guarded. "What is it, Brian?" "I followed you today. I saw you with Daniel," Brian stated, trying to keep his composure. Megan's face paled, and she took a step back. "Brian, I can explain." "Explain? How do you explain betraying me? Betraying our family?" Brian's voice rose, his anger bubbling to the surface. Tears welled up in Megan's eyes. "I'm sorry, Brian. I never meant for it to go this far." Brian shook his head, feeling the weight of her words. "Why, Megan? Why would you do this?" "I don't know. I felt disconnected, lost. Daniel made me feel alive again," Megan confessed, her voice barely a whisper. Brian's heart ached at her admission. "Was our life together not enough for you?" Megan sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "I'm so sorry, Brian. I didn't want to hurt you." Brian stood there, his mind racing. He loved Megan, but the pain of her betrayal was overwhelming. "I think you should leave, Megan. I need time to process this." Megan nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'll go to a hotel. We can talk more when you're ready." As she packed a bag and left, Brian sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the walls that had once held so much love and happiness. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he was determined to find a way to move forward, for himself and for his children. Brian woke up the next morning with a heavy heart. The house felt emptier without Megan's presence, and the reality of her betrayal weighed heavily on him. As he prepared breakfast for Chris and Hannah, he struggled to maintain a semblance of normalcy for their sake. "Morning, Dad," Chris greeted, rubbing the sleep from his eyes as he shuffled into the kitchen. "Morning, Chris. How did you sleep?" Brian asked, forcing a smile as he set a plate of pancakes on the table. "Pretty well. Where's Mom?" Chris asked, looking around. Brian hesitated, unsure of how to explain. "She had to go out of town for a few days. Work stuff." Hannah entered the kitchen, her sharp eyes immediately noticing the tension in the air. "Is everything okay, Dad?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Let's just have breakfast," Brian replied, avoiding her gaze. The breakfast was a quiet affair, the usual chatter replaced by an uneasy silence. Brian couldn't shake the feeling that his children sensed something was wrong. After they left for school, he sat at the kitchen table, contemplating his next move. He needed answers and decided to start by going through Megan's phone records and messages. Brian spent the next few hours meticulously combing through Megan's phone records, emails, and social media accounts. His heart sank as he uncovered numerous messages between Megan and Daniel, filled with flirtation and plans to meet in secret. The more he read, the more betrayed he felt. A message caught his eye, detailing their next meeting place, a small bed and breakfast on the outskirts of town. Brian's hands trembled as he read the details. Determined to gather more evidence, he decided to visit the place himself. That afternoon, Brian drove to the bed and breakfast, his mind racing with thoughts of what he might find. The quaint, picturesque setting seemed at odds with the turmoil he felt inside. As he approached the front desk, he forced a calm demeanor. "Good afternoon. I'm looking for my wife, Megan. She might have checked in with a colleague, Daniel," Brian said, trying to keep his voice steady. The receptionist looked up, her expression neutral. "Let me check our records. One moment, please." Brian waited, his heart pounding in his chest. The receptionist returned, her face giving nothing away. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't disclose any information about our guests," she said politely. Brian felt a surge of frustration. "Please, it's very important. Can you at least tell me if they're here?" The receptionist hesitated, then leaned in slightly. "Look, I shouldn't be telling you this, but yes, they're here. Room 204. Brian nodded, feeling a mix of relief and dread. He thanked her and made his way to the second floor, each step feeling heavier than the last. When he reached the door of room 204, he paused, taking a deep breath before knocking. The door opened, revealing Megan's shocked face. "Brian, what are you doing here? We need to talk, Megan." "Now," Brian said firmly, pushing past her into the room. Daniel stood by the window, looking equally surprised. "Brian, this isn't what it looks like." "Save it, Daniel. I know exactly what this is," Brian snapped, turning back to Megan. "How long has this been going on?" Megan's eyes filled with tears. "Brian, I'm so sorry. It started a few months ago. I never meant for it to get this far." Brian clenched his fists, struggling to keep his emotions in check. "Why, Megan? Why would you do this to us?" Megan broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "I felt lost, disconnected. Daniel made me feel alive again. But it was a mistake, Brian. I see that now." Brian's anger began to give way to a profound sadness. "We had a good life, Megan. Wasn't that enough?" Daniel, sensing the tension, stepped forward. "Brian, please, let me explain." Brian turned to him, his voice cold. "There's nothing you can say to make this better. This is between Megan and me." After the confrontation, Brian left the bed and breakfast, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He drove aimlessly for a while, eventually stopping at a park. He sat on a bench, staring blankly at the scenery as he tried to process everything. His phone buzzed with a text from Hannah. "Dad, where are you? Are you okay?" Brian typed a quick reply. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I'll be home soon." When he finally returned home, he found Chris and Hannah waiting for him in the living room, their faces filled with concern. "Dad, what's going on? Where's Mom?" Chris asked, his voice tense. Brian took a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation. "Your mom and I are going through a tough time. She made some mistakes, and we're trying to figure things out." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "Are you getting a divorce?" "We're not sure yet, Hannah. But no matter what happens, we both love you very much," Brian said, pulling his children into a comforting hug. The next few weeks were a blur of legal proceedings and emotional turmoil. Brian hired a lawyer, Andrew, to handle the divorce. Megan, too, had her own lawyer, Patrick. The negotiations were tense, with both sides struggling to find common ground. One afternoon, Brian sat in Andrew's office, discussing their strategy. "Brian, we need to gather as much evidence as possible to ensure a fair settlement." "Have you documented everything?" Andrew asked, his tone professional. "Yes, I've got all the messages and emails. But I don't want to drag this out. I just want what's best for the kids," Brian replied, feeling weary. Andrew nodded. "I understand. We'll do our best to resolve this quickly and amicably." The court hearings were emotionally draining for Brian. Each session brought new revelations and painful memories. Megan appeared remorseful, but Brian struggled to trust her again. Judge Mitchell, a stern yet fair man, presided over their case, ensuring that both parties had a chance to voice their concerns. After several weeks of intense negotiations, a settlement was finally reached. Brian and Megan would share custody of Chris and Hannah, with Megan moving into a small apartment nearby. The family home would remain with Brian, providing stability for the children. As they signed the final papers, Megan looked at Brian, tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Brian. I never meant for it to end like this." Brian sighed, feeling a mix of sadness and relief. "I know, Megan, but we need to move forward, for the kids' sake." In the weeks that followed, Brian focused on rebuilding his life. He threw himself into work, spent quality time with Chris and Hannah, and sought solace in his hobbies. Despite the pain of the past, he was determined to create a new future for himself and his children. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Hannah turned to her father. "Dad, do you think things will ever be normal again?" Brian smiled, ruffling her hair. "I don't know, Hannah. But we'll get through this together. That's what families do." Chris nodded in agreement. "Yeah, we've got each other. That's what matters." Brian felt a sense of hope for the first time in months. They had been through a lot, but he knew that with time, they would heal. Together, they would find a way to move forward and build a new, stronger family. Brian spent the next few months adjusting to his new reality. The house, once filled with the warmth of a complete family, now felt quieter. Despite the emptiness, Brian found solace in the routines he built with Chris and Hannah. Each day was a step towards healing, though the wounds of betrayal were still fresh. One Friday evening, Brian received a call from Richard, an old friend from college who had recently moved back to Boston. "Brian, it's been ages. How have you been holding up?" Richard's voice was filled with genuine concern. Brian smiled, feeling a sense of comfort in the familiar voice. "Hey, Richard, it's been tough, but I'm getting through it. How about you? Settling back into Boston life?" "Yeah, it's been good. Listen, why don't we catch up over dinner?" "My treat," Richard offered. Brian hesitated for a moment, then agreed. "That sounds great. I could use a night out." They met at a cozy restaurant downtown, the same place where Brian had attended Walter's retirement party. The familiar setting brought back memories, both good and bad. As they settled into their booth, Richard looked at Brian with a sympathetic smile. "I'm really sorry about what happened with Megan. I can't imagine how difficult it must be." Brian sighed, grateful for his friend's understanding. "Thanks, Richard. It's been a roller coaster, but I'm focusing on the kids and trying to move forward." Richard nodded. "That's the best you can do. Have you thought about seeing a therapist? It might help to talk to someone." Brian considered it for a moment. "I've been thinking about it. Maybe it's time I took that step." Encouraged by Richard's suggestion, Brian scheduled a therapy session. On the day of the appointment, he felt a mix of apprehension and hope as he walked into the therapist's office. Dr. Evelyn Ross, a warm and approachable woman in her early 40s, greeted him with a reassuring smile. "Welcome, Brian. Please, have a seat." Brian sat down, taking a deep breath. "Thank you, Dr. Ross. I'm not really sure where to start." "That's perfectly fine. Just tell me what's been on your mind," Dr. Ross encouraged. As Brian began to talk about his feelings of betrayal, anger, and sadness, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Dr. Ross listened attentively, offering insights and coping strategies. "It's important to acknowledge your feelings, Brian. Healing takes time, but you're taking the right steps," she said kindly. Brian left the session feeling lighter and more hopeful. He decided to continue therapy, realizing it could be a valuable tool in his journey towards healing. Back at home, Brian made a conscious effort to spend more quality time with Chris and Hannah. They went on weekend trips, cooked meals together, and played board games in the evenings. These moments of togetherness helped to strengthen their bond and provided a sense of normalcy. One Saturday afternoon, as they were preparing a barbecue in the backyard, Chris turned to his father. "Dad, do you think we'll ever have a family like we used to?" Brian paused, considering his response. "Chris, our family is different now, but that doesn't mean it can't be just as strong and loving. We're still a family, and we'll always be here for each other." Hannah nodded, her eyes bright with determination. "Yeah, we can make new memories together." Brian smiled, feeling a surge of pride and love for his children. "Exactly. We're in this together." As the months passed, Brian began to feel more like himself. He was dedicated to his job, but he also started exploring new opportunities that aligned with his interests. One day, he received an unexpected email from a nonprofit organization looking for a financial consultant. Intrigued, Brian set up a meeting with the organization's director, Maria Sanchez. "Brian, thank you for coming in. We're really impressed with your background and think you'd be a great fit for our team," Maria said, shaking his hand. Brian felt a sense of excitement he hadn't experienced in a long time. "Thank you, Maria. I'm really interested in the work your organization does and would love to contribute." After a productive discussion, Brian was offered the position. He accepted, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. With his new job and the support of his friends and family, Brian began to rebuild his life. He continued his therapy sessions with Dr. Ross, who helped him navigate the complexities of his emotions and find healthier ways to cope. One evening, as he sat in the living room with Chris and Hannah, Brian felt a sense of peace. They were watching a movie, laughing and enjoying each other's company. The past still lingered, but it no longer defined their future. Brian's phone buzzed with a message from Megan. He opened it, reading her words carefully. "Brian, I just wanted to say I'm sorry again for everything. I'm glad to hear you're doing well. Can we meet sometime to talk about the kids?" Brian thought for a moment, then replied, "Sure, Megan, we can meet next week." He knew that co-parenting with Megan would be challenging, but he was determined to make it work for Chris and Hannah's sake. The following week, Brian and Megan met at a neutral location, a quiet cafe. The conversation was awkward at first, but gradually, they found common ground in their love for their children. "Megan, I want us to be able to co-parent effectively." "Chris and Hannah deserve that," Brian said, his tone firm but fair. Megan nodded, her eyes filled with remorse. "I agree, Brian. I want to do what's best for them. Thank you for giving me a chance to make things right." As they discussed schedules and future plans, Brian felt a sense of closure. The wounds of the past were still there, but they were healing. He knew that moving forward would require effort from both of them, but he was ready to face the challenge. Brian's life began to take on a new rhythm. His work with the non-profit organization brought him fulfillment, and his time with Chris and Hannah was more precious than ever. He continued to explore new hobbies and interests, finding joy in the little things. One sunny afternoon, as Brian and his children sat in the backyard, Chris turned to his father with a thoughtful expression. "Dad, do you think you'll ever get married again?" Brian chuckled, ruffling Chris's hair. "I don't know, buddy. Right now, I'm just focused on us and making sure we're happy." Hannah leaned in, her eyes shining with curiosity. "But if you do, she has to be really nice. And she has to love us." Brian smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "Absolutely, Hannah. She would have to be someone very special." As the sun set, Brian looked around at his children and their home. They had been through a lot, but they had come out stronger on the other side. He knew that life would continue to throw challenges their way, but with the love and support of his family, he felt ready to face whatever came next. Brian took a deep breath, embracing the future with a newfound sense of hope and resilience. They were a family, and together, they would build a new, beautiful life. As the months continued to pass, Brian found himself growing more comfortable with his new life. The work at the nonprofit organization was fulfilling and allowed him to use his skills in ways that he hadn't before. One day, during a team meeting, he met Jennifer, a vibrant and passionate woman who had recently joined the organization as a community outreach coordinator. Jennifer was in her mid-30s, with a warm smile and an infectious enthusiasm for her work. Over the next few weeks, Brian and Jennifer often found themselves collaborating on projects. Their professional relationship quickly blossomed into a close friendship. One afternoon, after a particularly successful fundraising event, Jennifer suggested they grab coffee to celebrate. Brian agreed, and they found a cozy cafe nearby. "So, Brian," Jennifer began, taking a sip of her latte, "what do you do for fun when you're not saving the world?" Brian chuckled. "Well, I spend a lot of time with my kids, Chris and Hannah. We enjoy outdoor activities, movies, and cooking together. How about you?" Jennifer's eyes lit up. "I love hiking and painting. I also have a rescue dog named Max who keeps me pretty busy." As they continued to chat, Brian felt a connection with Jennifer that he hadn't felt in a long time. They shared similar interests and values, and he found himself looking forward to their conversations. Their friendship deepened over the next few months. Jennifer often joined Brian, Chris, and Hannah on their weekend outings, and Max quickly became a beloved addition to their adventures. The kids adored Jennifer, and Brian appreciated her easygoing nature and the joy she brought into their lives. One evening, as they all sat around a bonfire in the backyard, roasting marshmallows, Chris turned to Jennifer with a mischievous grin. "So, Jennifer, do you like scary stories?" Jennifer laughed. "I love them. Do you have a good one to share?" Chris launched into a spooky tale, his animated storytelling captivating everyone around the fire. As Brian watched Jennifer interact with his children, he felt a warmth in his heart. She fit so naturally into their lives, and he couldn't help but wonder if there might be a future for them beyond friendship. Brian and Jennifer continued to grow closer, and their friendship began to show signs of blossoming into something more. One evening, after a long day at work, Jennifer invited Brian over for dinner. As they sat on her balcony, overlooking the city lights, Jennifer turned to Brian with a thoughtful expression. "Brian, I've really enjoyed getting to know you and your kids these past few months. You've all become very important to me." Brian felt his heart race. "Jennifer, I feel the same way. You've brought so much happiness into our lives. I think I'm starting to feel more than just friendship for you." Jennifer smiled, her eyes sparkling. "I'm glad you said that, Brian. Because I feel the same way." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the city lights twinkling below them. Brian reached out and took Jennifer's hand, feeling a sense of peace and excitement about the possibilities that lay ahead. As Brian's relationship with Jennifer blossomed, he remained committed to maintaining a healthy co-parenting dynamic with Megan. They met regularly to discuss Chris and Hannah's schedules, school activities, and any concerns that arose. One afternoon, as they sat at a cafe discussing the kids' upcoming school events, Megan looked at Brian with a mixture of regret and sincerity. "Brian, I know I've said this before, but I'm truly sorry for everything. I'm glad we're able to work together for Chris and Hannah's sake." Brian nodded. "I appreciate that, Megan. Our focus needs to be on the kids and making sure they have the support they need." Megan hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I've heard you've been seeing someone. Jennifer, right? The kids seem to really like her." Brian smiled. "Yes, Jennifer has been wonderful. She's great with the kids, and they really enjoy spending time with her." Megan sighed, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I'm happy for you, Brian. You deserve to be happy." Brian reached across the table, placing a hand on hers. "Thank you, Megan. I hope you find happiness too." Just as things seemed to be settling into a new normal, life threw another curveball. One evening, as Brian and Jennifer were preparing dinner, Chris came home looking troubled. "Dad, can we talk?" Chris asked, his voice tense. "Of course, Chris. What's on your mind?" Brian replied, concerned. Chris hesitated before speaking. "It's about school. I've been struggling with my grades, and I don't know if I can keep up." Brian's heart sank. He had been so focused on rebuilding their lives that he hadn't noticed Chris's struggles. "Why didn't you tell me sooner, buddy? We'll figure this out together." Jennifer, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward. "Chris, maybe I can help. I used to tutor in college. We can work on your subjects together." Chris looked relieved. "That would be great, Jennifer. Thanks." As they worked together over the next few weeks, Chris's grades began to improve. Jennifer's patient guidance and encouragement made a significant difference, and Chris gained confidence in his abilities. Brian watched with pride as Chris's grades improved and Hannah thrived in her activities. His relationship with Jennifer grew stronger, and he felt a sense of hope for the future. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jennifer turned to Brian with a thoughtful expression. "Brian, I've been thinking. What if we took a family trip this summer? Just us, Chris, and Hannah. It could be a chance to create new memories together." Brian smiled, his heart swelling with love for Jennifer. "That sounds like a wonderful idea. Let's do it." They began planning the trip, involving Chris and Hannah in the process. The excitement in the house was palpable as they decided on a destination, a beachside town known for its beautiful landscapes and family-friendly activities. The trip turned out to be everything they had hoped for and more. They spent their days exploring the beach, playing games, and enjoying the local cuisine. Chris and Hannah bonded with Jennifer, and Brian felt a deep sense of contentment. One evening, as they sat around a bonfire on the beach, Hannah turned to Jennifer with a shy smile. "Jennifer, I'm really glad you're here with us. You make Dad really happy." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears of joy. "Thank you, Hannah. I'm so happy to be here with all of you." As the sun set over the horizon, Brian looked around at his family. They had been through so much, but they had come out stronger on the other side. He felt a profound sense of gratitude for the love and support they had found in each other. On the last day of their trip, Brian decided to take a leap of faith. As they walked along the beach, he took Jennifer's hand and led her to a secluded spot. "Jennifer, these past few months with you have been incredible. You've brought so much joy and love into my life and the lives of my children. I can't imagine my life without you," Brian said, his voice filled with emotion. Jennifer looked at him, her eyes shining with love. "Brian, I feel the same way. You and the kids have become my family." Taking a deep breath, Brian got down on one knee and pulled out a small velvet box. "Jennifer, will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Jennifer's face as she nodded. "Yes, Brian. 1,000 times yes." Brian slipped the ring onto her finger, and they embraced, feeling the love and promise of a beautiful future together. With their engagement, Brian and Jennifer began planning their wedding, involving Chris and Hannah in every step. The kids were thrilled, excited to officially welcome Jennifer into their family. The wedding was a small, intimate ceremony held in their backyard, surrounded by close friends and family. As Brian and Jennifer exchanged vows, they felt a deep sense of peace and joy. Brian looked into Jennifer's eyes, his heart overflowing with love. "Jennifer, you brought light and love back into my life. I promise to cherish and support you, to stand by your side through all of life's challenges and joys." Jennifer smiled, her eyes filled with tears. "Brian, you and the kids have given me a family and a home. I promise to love and support you, to be there for you and the kids always." As they kissed, their friends and family cheered, celebrating the union of two hearts that had found their way to each other. With their marriage, Brian and Jennifer embarked on a new chapter of their lives. They faced challenges and joys together, supporting each other through thick and thin. Chris and Hannah thrived in the loving environment, their bond with Brian and Jennifer growing stronger every day. The family created new traditions and cherished the moments they spent together. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Brian looked at his family with gratitude. They had been through a lot, but they had built a beautiful life together. Jennifer reached out and took Brian's hand. "Here's to new beginnings and a lifetime of happiness." Brian smiled, raising his glass. "To love, family, and the future." As they clinked glasses, Brian felt a deep sense of contentment. They had overcome the past and embraced the future, finding love and happiness along the way. Together, they knew they could face anything life threw at them, with love and support guiding their path. After their wedding, Brian and Jennifer decided to move into a new home that would be theirs together from the start. They found a beautiful house in a welcoming neighborhood, complete with a spacious backyard where Chris and Hannah could play and Max, Jennifer's rescue dog, could roam freely. Moving day was filled with excitement and a bit of chaos, as friends and family pitched in to help. Boxes were unpacked, furniture arranged, and by the end of the day, the house began to feel like home. That evening, as they sat on the porch with a glass of wine, Jennifer turned to Brian with a contented sigh. "This is it, Brian. Our home, our family. I'm so happy." Brian smiled, wrapping an arm around her. "Me too, Jennifer. It's the start of something beautiful." Life settled into a pleasant rhythm, but like any family, they faced their share of challenges. Balancing work, school, and family time required effort and communication. One evening, as Brian helped Hannah with her homework, she looked up, frustration evident on her face. "Dad, I don't understand this math problem. It's too hard." Brian knelt beside her, patience in his voice. "Let's take it step by step, Hannah. We'll figure it out together." Jennifer, overhearing from the kitchen, smiled as she prepared dinner. "You're a great dad, Brian. The kids are lucky to have you." Brian glanced up, feeling the warmth of her words. "We're all in this together, Jennifer. That's what makes it work." Meanwhile, Megan was on her own path of self-discovery and healing. She focused on her career, building strong relationships with her colleagues, and finding ways to contribute meaningfully at work. She also sought therapy to understand and address the reasons behind her actions. Through this process, Megan found a renewed sense of purpose and clarity. One afternoon, as Megan met Brian to discuss the kids' schedules, she shared her progress. "Brian, I've been seeing a therapist. It's helped me understand a lot about myself and what I need to work on." Brian nodded, respect in his eyes. "I'm glad to hear that, Megan. It takes courage to face these things. I'm proud of you." Their co-parenting relationship continued to improve, with mutual respect and understanding guiding their interactions. The family experienced many joyous milestones together. Chris graduated from high school with honors, and the entire family, including Megan, celebrated his achievement. The graduation party was filled with laughter, tears of joy, and heartfelt speeches. Brian raised a toast, his voice filled with pride. "To Chris, who has worked so hard and achieved so much." We are all incredibly proud of you." Chris smiled, his eyes glistening with emotion. "Thank you, everyone. I couldn't have done it without your support." Hannah also flourished, excelling in her studies and extracurricular activities. She developed a passion for art, often spending hours drawing and painting in her room. Jennifer, noticing her talent, encouraged her. "Hannah, your artwork is amazing. Have you thought about taking some art classes?" Hannah beamed. "I'd love that, Jennifer. Thank you for believing in me." A year after their wedding, Brian and Jennifer received some exciting news. They were expecting a baby. The announcement brought a wave of joy and anticipation to the family. Chris and Hannah were thrilled at the prospect of a new sibling. Chris joked, "I'll be the best big brother ever. Just wait and see." Hannah added, "I can't wait to help take care of the baby. It's going to be so much fun." As Jennifer's pregnancy progressed, Brian and the kids supported her every step of the way. They attended doctor's appointments, prepared the nursery, and eagerly awaited the baby's arrival. On a beautiful spring morning, Jennifer gave birth to a healthy baby girl they named Mia. The family gathered at the hospital, their hearts overflowing with love and happiness as they welcomed the newest member. Brian held Mia in his arms, tears of joy streaming down his face. "Welcome to the world, Mia. We're so glad you're here." Jennifer smiled, exhausted but radiant. "She's perfect, Brian. Our little miracle." Chris and Hannah took turns holding their baby sister, their faces glowing with pride and affection. With Mia's arrival, the family's bond grew even stronger. They navigated the challenges of parenthood together, finding joy in the everyday moments and milestones. One evening, as they sat in the living room with Mia in her crib, Brian turned to Jennifer with a thoughtful expression. "Life has taken us on quite a journey, hasn't it?" Jennifer nodded, her eyes filled with love. "It has. But I wouldn't change a thing. We've built something beautiful together." Brian smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "Here's to our family and the future. Whatever comes our way, we'll face it together." As they clinked their glasses, Brian looked around at his family, Jennifer, Chris, Hannah, and baby Mia. They had been through so much, but they had emerged stronger, united by love and resilience. The future was bright, filled with endless possibilities. And as they embraced the journey ahead, Brian knew that with his family by his side, anything was possible. As Brian, Jennifer, and their children gather around the dinner table, the warmth and love in their home are palpable. Despite the trials and tribulations, they have come together to create a new and stronger family. With baby Mia's laughter filling the room, they toast to the future, knowing that whatever challenges lie ahead, they will face them united. Their journey has been one of heartache and healing, but through it all, they have found a deep, abiding love and resilience. Together, they are ready to embrace whatever comes next, proving that with family by your side, anything is possible.